oftentimes strategic plans are really more incrementalist. How do we do something a bit better? How do we focus a little bit better? But is there really an opportunity here, which is really what I'm excited about talking about today, to relook at what that membership model and the underlying financial model and the member value actually is, and say, no, all these things, it's true, the world is falling, but it's always a question of how we frame it and how we look at it and where we actually see perhaps there is an opportunity, that perhaps there's a phoenix that can arise anew that we haven't really thought of before.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Grype podcast. In this podcast, we learn how to grow member-based organizations. I'm your host Farhad Khan. I am the CEO of Grype Digital. We build membership websites, and our product Member Lounge is one of the quickest way for you to build a customized membership portal for your association. We host a number of learning events throughout the month, so if you want to learn how a membership website can help grow your association membership, please join one of our learning events. You can find them on our website at grype.ca/events. That is grype.ca/events. This is a live recording of our podcast episode. If you are joining us live today, welcome. It's great to have you here. We received some amazing questions from the audience, so I don't think we'll get a chance to go through all the questions, but we will pick the top questions from the list that we got. And if you have any more questions during the episode, please submit them on the chat window on the right, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Today, we are excited to speak to Randall Craig. Randall is the CEO of Pinetree Advisors. Randall has a lot of experience working with associations and with digital transformation. Randall has written 8 books. Can you imagine? 8 books, and one of them is also a bestseller. Randall, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your work?
Wonderful, thanks, and thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. Yeah, a lot of my work is spending my time thinking about what the future might hold for my clients. What might that future look like? And particularly at the intersection of marketing and technology, where engagement, for example, membership growth, all those things coalesce. And I got my start way back. In the internet age. I'm the guy that put the Toronto Star online, or Globe and Mail's Globe Investor, Globe Fund, or Workopolis, and a bunch of other major sites much earlier. The last decade or two has been pretty much focused on the association space and membership, just because, frankly, it's nice people and makes a significant difference in the marketplace. And just absolutely love it. So that's kind of my background. We'll get more into it. I think it's more important what I have to say, and your questions, Farhad, and the audience's questions. So let's just dive in and see where it takes us.
Wonderful. Randall, so in our discussion earlier, you mentioned that you think that the association membership model is broken for many associations. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, I'm not in the business of ticking people off. And I hope, when I say what I'm going to say, you keep yourself open to it and say to yourself, well, is there something in what he's saying that actually applies to us? And even if it doesn't, if we think about it, social media is building a community, and it's independent of associations. Meetups, they're connected to the associations, but they have their life of their own. Education is provided to associations. It's provided by associations in other jurisdictions, and they're wicking off a segment of our membership, and they're throttling education revenues. And individual thought leaders themselves are providing excellent professional development, also direct to customer, direct to members. And on top of that, certainly the last 2 years, COVID has forced many additional costs and a lot more complexity. And predictably, a number of associations, many, are seeing membership numbers and the associated revenues drop even further. And without an annual conference, certainly the last 2 years, real world ones, and a trade show, and often that's funds operating costs, it's very hard to build up non-dues revenue when the sponsors are asking the question, well, maybe there isn't so much for me. So that's kind of where I kind of frame this very interesting place where we are right now. And on top of that, we've got the perennial problem that, this isn't the 1950s where everybody joined their professional association because that's what one did. if you look at any of the research and speak to your own young professionals and millennials, they're not joiners the way perhaps their parents and grandparents are. So, life today is very different than the 1950s and 60s for this particular group. So, what might be true, back then, even without all these structural changes, is very, very different now. So what do we do? I think I know a number of associations who said, yes, this is a huge opportunity for transformation, this huge opportunity to do something. And I've seen certainly some strategic plans that are very interesting, but I've also, and I don't want to say anything negative, but oftentimes strategic plans are really more incrementalist. How do we do something a bit better? How do we focus a little bit better? But is there really an opportunity here, which is really what I'm excited about talking about today, to relook at what that membership model and the underlying financial model and the member value actually is, and say, no, all these things, it's true, the world is falling, but it's always a question of how we frame it and how we look at it and where we actually see perhaps there is an opportunity, that perhaps there's a phoenix that can arise anew that we haven't really thought of before. And that's what excites me about the sector, because we've been beaten so much by all these changes that I really think that there's an opportunity, a real opportunity, not just to grow our membership, but actually make a difference in the sectors we serve.
Right. So Randall, what approach should we take in the strategic planning then, if they're not incremental? So if you have to take radical changes, make radical changes, do you have a model or something?
Well, I wish I could say I had the answer. Okay, but every single association client I've worked with has been somewhat different. Yes, they all have a website. Yes, they have members. Yes, they want non-dues revenue. Some are mandatory, some are not. But the every organization is different, and so it's not just a question of the framework, but it's also a question of understanding a little bit more about the culture. Okay, understanding kind of what's happening in a wider context and everything. I will say though, if we think about what the drivers of change actually are, drivers of value for members, I think sometimes we need to go back to those first principles. And when we do a traditional strategic planning exercise, those principles typically involve a lot of surveying of members and focus groups of members, etc. And I'm going to suggest that perhaps what we need to do is look outside of the box. The people who aren't members, the people, for example, who are doing great, thank you, on LinkedIn, who are great, buying professional development from independent thought leaders, the people who are doing very well joining the association from some other country, the United States, UK, wherever it happens to be, we need to be speaking to them and saying, okay, so what is the value that you actually see here? Is it the traditional ones like, education, certification, advocacy, community building? In the olden days, you came to, the chapter meeting or the annual convention, okay, and you would be fed, if you will, because that was the place to happen. With social, with online, obviously it's a little bit differently now, because people can self-serve themselves by going to Dr. Google and ordering whatever they happen to want, and very often it's sometimes even free. Okay, so back to the question, really, in my view, is a fundamental one for associations, is to say, are we looking at this maybe from the wrong frame? Is there another opportunity here completely different than that requires us to reconstitute how we serve and what our reason for being actually is? And I've got some ideas, which obviously I'm going to share in a moment, but I think that's what needs to happen. And the problem and the reason why I think so many associations, by the way, some are doing this, but the reason why some associations are not is because the leaders of the associations have gotten so good at what they're doing. they're members of all the different associations. They invest hugely in their own professional development in doing what they're doing, which is running a sophisticated organization that has got all these different, things, education, certification, advocacy, all those things. But they may not have spent an entire career getting good at change management or strategic planning. And as a result of that, when it comes to, okay, how do we sort of look outside? We look around, we say, okay, so you know what? Let's see, the best of the associations are doing this or that. But, I think sometimes, once again, you survey the non-members, not just the members. We can look outside of the association space for what the benchmarks are and sort of what changes have taken place. In banking, for example, I hate to sort of date myself, but I remember when there was no ATMs, and then all of a sudden there's ATMs. They reinvented themselves, okay? And then web banking transformed banking again. I know this banking is not as interesting as running your association, unless you're a banking association. But the idea here, more than anything else, is that, that state institution, they've been able to reinvent themselves. Okay, sometimes not for our benefit, but for the shareholders, for sure. Take a look at social media. They've figured out how to harness the network effects of large groups. Fascinating. And in a certain sense, they're beating our entire sector at its own game. But the whole concept of a network effect is one where the bigger the network becomes, the more cohesive and valuable it actually becomes as a network. Or, for example, even Tesla. It completely disrupted the automotive sector, not because it was electric cars, although that was certainly part of it, but because they got rid of the one irritant of anybody having to, who's thinking about buying a car. They got rid of the automobile dealerships, right? Completely, right? So all of a sudden they're thinking about doing it in a completely different way. All of a sudden new ideas come about. And so even though incremental change and continuous improvement is very good, the decision, COVID, let's try to go virtual. Do we really need the office? That's right. We are able to reduce our ongoing costs. Something? We're going to get a new website, new logo. Okay, we're now fresh, etc. Okay, we're going to get a new fill in the blank, and that moves us forward in an incremental way. That always has to happen. But my sort of song right now is, if we're thinking about digital transformation, it does not mean implementing a new member management system, a new website, or dare I say, Farhad, a membership site. Okay, that's not it. Okay, I think first what has to happen is the transformation. And then we could talk about how does technology actually address that. And I think that's a big miss.
So I hear you saying that it's more about strategic planning. It's about going back to the drawing board and kind of doing some business modeling in itself, just like for-profit corporations do their business modeling, finding out what are the core values, what are the values that you can probably deliver to your members, and what are the values that members actually need. And by going outside your network, because you have been talking to your members for so long, you know what they want pretty much, but you haven't been speaking to people who are outside, and then take the ideas from there. Now, yeah,
I think you're right. I think you're right. I want to play a game of what if. Okay, and the reason why the game of what if is interesting is this, and what I'd like you to do, and all the listeners, watchers to do is try and answer these questions for your association. Now, I know some of the listeners here, viewers, are, their members are organizations, not individuals. Others are mandatory versus voluntary. There's all kinds, but play along with me. What if every member or member organization had to do their bookkeeping, accounting, and tax? What if every member had to purchase insurance? What if every member had to purchase raw materials and office supplies? What if every member had a reserve that they had to keep for a rainy day? And what if every member needed legal services? And what if every member had to implement technology like marketing automation and CRM and ERP and HRIS and all that? What if every member had to recruit new staff and train them? So the answer to this what if game is, well, yeah, of course, they're in business. They've got to do all these things. So the question then becomes, is it possible that perhaps, just perhaps, a raison d'etre and a business model for associations isn't just providing a certification and advocacy, but it would be to actually do some of these things or to coordinate some of these things on behalf? What if, for example, an association decided to do all the treasury management of all of the cash balances of all of its members? What if? Okay, what if, for example, it had a plan to provide insurance of a certain type, where the first layer of insurance was done. And I'm not talking about sponsorship programs. I'm not talking about, gee, we could make some revenue just like by providing, good life memberships at the corporate rate. No, this is not that kind of thing. This is a question of, gee, if we're able to provide these things, and it can be white labeled and provided by somebody else, etc., but the people doing it would know your sector better than anyone else, which, by the way, is kind of what happens at an association. You kind of know your sector better than anyone else, right? But if you're able to provide, even if you're able to get a quarter, a third of your members using a particular service for which there's all this revenue that's being generated, what could you do with that revenue? You could reduce the membership fees for those who are using the services. You could invest in more powerful advocacy. You could do a lot more outreach to new members. There's a million things that you could do once you started down the path of, gee, maybe our role as an association isn't just the usual education, certification, community, those traditional things, but maybe there's a shared service component to the offering. And it doesn't have to be everything all at once. And it certainly isn't yet another, corporate partnership where you get, 1 or 2%, commissions back for the referrals. But in terms of substantively providing that service, there's associations today that have this model, and their future is very different than the ones who are trying to justify their fees. Well, guess what? If your association is replete with cash because your members are valuing that which you're providing, effectively the loss leader stuff, which is the core, like advocacy, for example, or certification, or some of the other things, that's paid for by some of the commercial ventures as well. And it's no longer a question of saying, well, how might we increase our membership, or staunch the flow of people going out, or compete against social media. Okay, social media doesn't provide payroll, okay, or it doesn't provide accounting, or it doesn't provide, purchasing, or whatever the particular shared service is, right? And by the way, if you're an association of people who are, painters, what their needs would be is very different than an association filled with, say, nurses, or one that only does large corporate groups. So what the shared services are there's got to be a demand for them, but there's got to be an economic reason why somebody would prefer to switch to the association provided service as well. And so all of a sudden, and I suspect that it's okay if people don't agree with me. All I'm saying, by the way, is that when we think about how we look at membership-based organizations, associations, we can't be looking at through the lens of what worked in the 1950s works today, because we're all fighting this uphill battle. But I'm saying that, is it worth a conversation about whether a shared service business model has merit or not? Because when we talk about digital transformation, typically what happens is a hardware or a software vendor says, hey, license our software and you will have, by definition, digital transformation. And unfortunately, all that does is guarantee more software sales for whoever's selling whatever software and services. Instead of saying, you know what, if we've got the business model right, and our service model right, and we've actually done the real world transformation that's necessary, perhaps then there's a role for technology in order to actually implement it and reduce the cost of delivery of whatever that is. But if we're just talking about, oh my God, let's implement yet another system, who hasn't implemented a system and said at the very end, boy, has this been painful or expensive or painful and expensive, right? So the idea of doing this transformation first, which all starts with a conversation, okay, like the conversation we're having right now. Okay, for our leaders and boards to be courageous and say, I don't know if this will work for us, but you know something, if we keep on digging faster, we're not going to get out of the hole, right? We got to try something different. To paraphrase Albert Einstein, who said something very similar. So the questions that I would say should be part of these conversations are the words, how might we? How might we provide X services, accounting and bookkeeping services to our clients? How might we add taxes? How might we set up an insurance carrier or agency for our members' benefit? How might we set up a buying group for raw materials or for office supplies? How might we manage our members' reserve funds and cash balances? How might we directly provide legal services? All these kinds of things leads to an interesting discussion of different alternatives. And you're right. I do have a framework in terms of how to think through all this thing. But the first thing that has to happen is there's got to be some curiosity. There's got to be some question about, something. We've been playing at this with various non-dues revenue initiatives, but all we're doing is we're getting that 5% or 10% or super small little referral fee. We're not really, if somebody looks around, they can get it. But if you're a member and you get that invoice, and what's going through your mind is very simple. Should I pay? COVID the last 2 years, it's not actually been a great experience. Okay, what's the value? Why don't I take a year out? And of course, we know once somebody takes a year out, getting them back in is almost impossible, right? But instead, if some of their bona fide business or personal stake was put into the association. When I say business, if you imagine an organizational member, do you think businesses really like to pay to have lots and lots of people, members of an organization? I assure you, a CFO is going to say, why are we paying so much for this? What value do we get? Mm-hmm. And, in the best associations know how to answer that. But not everybody does. And the answer doesn't fly with many financial leaders in your members. But what if, on the other hand, they were actually getting a dividend because they were using some of the services that were critical for the business and were only best provided by the association as a shared service? The idea of paying for membership in order to access something of great value, for that financial decision maker, it's a no-brainer. And for the organizations, for the associations that are individual membership based, I think that's something that's very different. In that particular case, it's, well, what do I got here for myself? I'm here because I want to advance my personal career, right? I want to make a difference within my industry as an individual. Well, what are we doing to provide something for them? I assure you that what we're providing right now, for most associations, people are questioning the value primarily because COVID has caused them to wake up a bit, right? And there'll always be the loyal members. But if you want to grow your association and retain the best and the smartest, make a difference from an advocacy perspective, we got to play the personal too. And by the way, Farhad, I had a conversation a while ago. Sorry for just blabbing, but one association executive director said to me a number of years ago, we're a mandatory membership association. We really don't care about all this kind of stuff because according to legislation, they have to become a member. And my answer to that is, yeah, you're absolutely right. You are miles ahead of others in the sense that you don't really need to think about that for your survival. But that being said, you rely on volunteers, don't you? Yes. Do you think it's a better thing, mandatory or not, that people are proud of being members rather than being upset that they've got to pay a due every year? Do they look at that expenditure as a investment or as money, a necessary cost that they are not happy paying? Do you want happy members who are truly engaged, or do you want people who really, their only involvement is writing you a check? I said clearly, there's benefits whether you're mandatory or whether you're a voluntary organization. So that's kind of where my mind is here, and I hope it's provided some food for thought at least.
Absolutely. So, Randall, we know that association leaders, like, they're very smart people, very talented. They have a lot of experience, right? And a lot of them, like, know this as well, right? So, why the hesitancy in executing on some of these ideas, you think?
Oh man, you're actually right. I mean, that's why I love the sector. There's a lot of super smart people, but I have never met an executive director that I would ever call lazy, or has too much time on their hands, or isn't ridiculously busy, or isn't farsighted. Pretty much every executive director that I've seen has been a superlative leader. But they got to keep the lights on every day, right? There's just only so much time. You've got to worry about making payroll, pardon the pun, right? And it's just making sure, particularly in this crazy time the last several years with COVID, to understand what the heck this all means and how to make sure. And gee, we're not having the conference. Gee, we got to do it virtual. So all of a sudden, there's all this new learning, all about keeping the lights on. Can you imagine all of a sudden we're not going to have an in-person conference? What do I talk to the sponsors about? Gee, there's no shortage of things that have rightfully taken the priority of pretty much every association executive director and leadership team. It's been tough. And by the way, the economic fallout of it has been very tough too. There's been a lot of very good people who sadly had to been asked to leave their jobs just because the economics didn't work. And I think that's really, really sad, because there are really good people. So part of it is I think from an executive director or leadership perspective is to put up your hand and work with the board and the committees and say, I think we need to take a step back for a moment. COVID is hopefully just about done. We're going to be moving to this next stage, which whatever the heck that means. But I think that people are used to change a little bit more over the last couple of years, and I think there's an opportunity here to talk about some more strategic issues with respect to where it goes, and most so on one hand the executive director needs to push. On the other hand, the chair of the board and the board leadership has got to pull, and the board's not responsible in many associations for the day-to-day, but what they are responsible for is the what's happening in the medium long term. What are the priorities, putting together and managing and the strategic plan. And I think that the board has got a role to say, well, listen, is there merit in this shared service idea? By the way, there's a few other concepts too, but let's just focus on that one in this call. And is there merit here? And is this something that we really should be looking into? And what might that mean? And, the part of it, they could say to the executive director, okay, go see what it means, right? But the poor executive director likely has their plate full already. Okay, so they go outside and they speak to somebody like me, or there's plenty of other people who are visionaries and advisors who can have that conversation. But it's got to come from both, because if the executive director and the employee team don't realize that, hey, heck, times are changing. We can't just be processing the same way. Okay, and the answer is not just another website of one sort or the other, another new system, but it's about doing stuff differently. That's important for them to pick up their hand, right? And on the other hand, boards have got to they've got to be boards, right? There's no it's nice to say that you're on a board, but the heavy lifting is to say, okay, what if we were to take this right back to the studs and then build it back out again? what is there? The how, what if, and how might we questions that I spoke about earlier on, right? Maybe we don't have all the answers here. But if we only had the questions, we could probably figure those answers out for ourselves. And that's what I meant by let's start that conversation. Because only after that conversation starts and there's some movement can, in my view, can the board say, yeah, I think we need to implement this kind of new solution or that one, whether it be technology or whether it be some real world thing, maybe a new approach to sponsorship. Well, an approach to sponsorship would be very different if you've got a shared service model, just as an example, okay, than if you don't. What you want from a CRM or an association management system, okay, or a membership site, what you'll want from that is vastly different if you're following the kind of path that I'm talking about. But what happens if you say, well, we're just gonna do a new website? Well, I think, listen, there's some bad websites out there, and you got to refresh them. So there's no question about that, right? So you have to keep the lights on. But you also have to realize you're spending money on some of this technology. You're spending some of this money on some of these other non-tech initiatives, okay? If the strategy is going to change on its side, this member value focused strategy I'm talking about, truly member value focused, not the words we've used for decades now. Well, guess what? That means that any technology or any initiative program dollars you spend right now, you may need to spend them a second time because you don't want to be locked in to yesterday's thinking. And I think that's a real challenge because oftentimes people think that yesterday's thinking is actually today's thinking or tomorrow's thinking, because often vendors will feed them all kinds of stuff about what you can do, etc. But that's a software first process as opposed to an organization strategic plan driven focus. So does this make sense, Farhad?
I love what you're saying, Randall. To be honest, I actually have a video where I shared that a lot of associations get it wrong. Whenever they have a need for a new CRM or a membership website, they go out there and find a solution first before knowing what problem they're trying to fix. So, and we have seen that again and again. Many our clients projects fail many years ago. So what we started doing is that before we take on any new client, we do a strategic workshop with them. It's a given. You have to do the workshop with us to actually hire us. So we do that workshop, and you cannot imagine how many times at the end of the workshop, our recommendation was to not build a membership website, but to hire a virtual CFO who can actually clean up some things that you have in your accounting right now, right? So yeah. So I think you're speaking my mind. So Randall, you do a lot of digital transformation in general. So an association who's really behind even on the digital aspect of things, right? Because with COVID, we have to take everything online, serve members online, right? And if an association needed to do digital transformation at this point in time, where would you start?
Oh man, I think part of I sort of semi-answered that a little bit. I think on one hand the question is start with the transformation, not the digital. Okay.
Right.
And don't speak to anyone about digital, honestly. Sorry, Farhad. But I think that transformational work has to happen first, or at least the conversation. And I think a long part of that is also to say, is to play that what if, how might we game, and to do that in a facilitated kind of way, because once you decide, for example, you're going to take on, okay, well, listen, treasury management and managing cash balances, that seems like that's a good idea. There may be a need, it might be fulfilled right now, but what does an association know about that, right? So there's a whole middle part that needs to happen, a little bit more deeper investigation into all the potential shared services and everything. I also think that there needs to be some benchmarking, not with other associations, okay, but I think that we need to get inspiration outside of the industry. I do some other work in professional services and and in in other knowledge-based sectors. And there's a ton that can be learned there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. As sharp as we are, we can say, hey, that worked in this industry, with this sector, with this organization. Is that applicable here? Not that we're going to do it, but in terms of having inputs into that planning process, right? I think it's also a very useful thing to say sometimes, there's some low-hanging fruit that we need to fix just because it's an irritant, to our members, or because it, internally, we're very inefficient. There's still some associations, and I'm sure that there's nobody listening here who are on old style association management systems that had no flexibility, and were maybe even running in a, the old PC in the corner, and everyone sort of logs into, they still exist out there. So maybe there's some things that need to happen to at least, bring us into 2022, 2023, etc. But don't mistake that for digital transformation. That's just for example, moving from an ATM to web banking. Okay, the transformation is what's happening back at the branch in terms of what all those tellers used to do, which was just take your money and give you money, to all of a sudden becoming sales agents and customer service agents, doing completely different jobs, and then organizing yourself in a completely different way, right? So I know, we're not talking about ATMs and associations, but that's an example of a metaphor that I think is very, very helpful. I think also, another thing that is very useful is to do some market research. And we talked about this earlier, just to understand far more strongly, what is it that the non-members are getting out of it? Why is it, for example, that there's some amazing LinkedIn groups in almost every sector? There's over 2 million LinkedIn groups out there. A lot of them aren't really, relevant, okay, but many of them probably are. And the question is, why is it that people glom onto those as opposed to becoming part of your association? Now, the better associations realized this years ago, and they're the ones who basically are running some of these LinkedIn groups, but many aren't. And many of them are competitive, and many of them, siphon your members out, and, they're finding community there without a problem. It's a real community. It's a very collaborative one, right? Or there's also some associations that said, heck, you know what? We're going to build our entire social media plan for members to be on Facebook. And we're going to have a Facebook group, which, by the way, there's some reasons why you might want to do that. Okay. But on the other hand, you're just a tenant in somebody else's building. You're not the landlord. So why wouldn't you have that on your own? Well, and there's good reasons why you don't want to have it on your own too. So it's not one size fits all here. But this is the kind of thinking that I think is needed to happen before you embark on a so-called digital transformation. Benchmarking, the understanding of where value actually lies with prospective members, including those who are would never have even considered. I think there's a demographic issue that maybe we shouldn't be thinking about membership as a black-white. Yes, you're a member. No, you're not a member. Oh, sorry. Farhad, should I paraphrase? You're a young professional member. You're an associate member. You're a member, okay? And you're an honorary member because you're retired, but we still want you around. But we don't want you you don't need to pay fees, right? So no, I think these are very discrete steps. And I think certainly younger people, and actually more and more older people too, are saying, maybe the membership concept should be more fluid. Maybe it should be shades of gray. Maybe I'll swoop in to get something like a certification and swoop out. And swoop in for some professional development, swoop out. Swoop in, maybe I'll attend a webinar. Swoop in, maybe this year I'm going to go to that conference. Maybe I'm not. But they don't see themselves as a member. They're just saying, hey, these are the specific points of value that organization is providing, just like this LinkedIn organization is providing value, and this meetup is providing value, and my private mastermind is providing value, and all these other things are providing value. So unless your digital transformation project is looking at some of these things, all you're doing is automating kind of what's there.
And maybe what's broken, right?
And
Maybe you're automating what is broken. Yeah.
So it's actually even funny you say that, Farhad, because most associations actually aren't broken by this time. The processes are actually really good. In most of them that I've dealt with, the management has been like superb, and because there's so many stakeholders, these leaders are frankly far, far better equipped than many corporate leaders to do their job. But I don't think it's a question of broken. I think we've been having for a number of years a very, very slow leaking. And, we don't notice it, right? But then all of a sudden, we look at the membership numbers or the engagement statistics or whatever it is that you're looking, or the budgets, etc. And then something like COVID hits and you sort of wake up and you say, oh, what's going on here, right? And you realize that, holy cow, we got to do something here. So it's not like it's all of a sudden broken. It's just we've been leaking this for a little bit by little bit by little bit for many, many, many years. Older people retiring out of the industry, younger people having a very different view of what membership is. Sponsors, they've got their own sort of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not broken, but it's terribly broken. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and then an analogy that I often give to my association clients is that being an association is almost like being a buffet, where different people will come to your buffet to actually maybe eat different food, right? And one member will not probably eat everything that you have in the buffet, right? So maybe they will go to one section and really like that. Now you have to choose what kind of buffet you want to be, what services you want to actually offer that your members will actually find value in.
Yeah, I think the analogy is a good one. Okay. I know that buffets in me are very dangerous, because the eyes are bigger than the stomach. But I also think that we have a challenge, because if the restaurateur, if the chef is always putting the same things on the buffet, because there's one or two people who feel very strongly about that one or two thing. And then the next year, we're going to do another initiative and more on the buffet. Then there's something else and even more on the buffet. Okay. Then all of a sudden, okay, it's not like there's only a little bit of a portion of everything. Everything's super thin, lots of choices, but very, very thin. And I think one of the more important retention and engagement parameters is to have some depth more than you can do. By the way, the worst of all of this is social media, okay, where everyone's got a day job. Then all of a sudden, remember this, social media made its appearance, and there are some real benefits to it and costs. But all of a sudden, social media is being done on the corner of somebody's desk. They have a day job already, but it's done on the corner of the desk. In other organizations, social media was there's a young person who really got it, and they've basically manufactured an entire job out of social media. Notwithstanding, they had a day job already, which wasn't getting done, but they expanded that job to do all social media. But that social media wasn't connected to the strategy, right? So we look at all these different initiatives, new member system, okay, new learning management system, new certification, new advocacy approach, new this, new that. It doesn't matter what it is, but all these little things are being added to the buffet, right? And at a certain time, a member says, heck, I don't know if I need all these things. Maybe it's better just to go to a very fine French restaurant and have the best food, but maybe the quantities aren't the greatest, but it's the best. It's a Michelin star French restaurant. Okay, that's what we need to move towards when it comes to old style buffet thinking, if you will. It's not the more of this, right? It's the stuff that matters that needs to be there, and that's what's critical. So back to digital transformation. We want to transform some things onto the plate, and we want to transform some things off. And the things we want to transform, whether the target is a legislator or for advocacy, whether the target is a prospective member, whether the target is somebody who's looking to be certified, whether it's whoever it is, existing members, We want to make sure that what gets on the plate is something that they value in a substantive way. And the fact that we've got all this amazing momentum and history and everything, that's the foundation, right? And my view is that that business model of the future has got to be one that really is transformed. Because I'm very concerned about what the future of the sector will be, unless we're able to deal with this particular issue.
Right. Well, also, since we build membership websites, I want to hear your thoughts on if given a situation where to engage their members better, and they are kind of thinking about building a membership website, right? So what should they be looking at to actually provide a great member experience?
Okay. Well, obviously there's some basics. There can't be any friction, right, for the user. There's got to be internal efficiency. Yeah, the brand has got to be in sync, okay, etc. I've always thought that what's behind the membership website, potential members need to see what's there. They've got to be able to see what's behind the glass, but they can't eat it, right? Because that's a great incentive to become a member. So I think that's part of it. But I think what makes a good membership website is really more a question of answering the questions, what are the things that members must have? Things that are really valuable to them, things that will make a real difference to their business or their careers if it's an individual. We have too much nice to have. A membership website is not a dumping ground of archival content for the last 300 years. Okay, it's got, the question is, every single thing on your membership site, and by the way, everything on the public site has got an addition to be there. If there's no value, real value for the members, why is it there? If a great test is to say this, how much do you think this member would pay to read this? And if the answer is, no, they probably won't, then you probably have an indication of perhaps in the member's eyes, as hard as it is to imagine this, that piece of information would have zero value. And by the way, I'm not saying that you shouldn't put it on, because oftentimes you put stuff on there so that people can self-serve in a way, and it provides internal efficiency. So I think that the must-haves are critically important. And as you probably have guessed right now, I think that the whole association sector is missing a huge number of must-haves. My what if, how might we conversation beforehand specifically.
Right. So Randall, you and I can talk about this, I think, all day, but we're running out of time. So I want to jump to some audience questions.
For sure.
So I'll start picking up some questions that were submitted earlier by our audience. So two people had the same question. So Atiba Khari and NG Vidya, they both had the same question, and they're asking a lot of our membership is kind of a 60 plus age range, so they're older members, right? And then they're not very tech savvy. So how do you cater to them at the same time catering to younger members when everything is going online?
Well, that's really tough. And how I would have answered, say, at the beginning of COVID, pre-COVID, and now is very different. There's a lot of older members who now feel a lot more comfortable on Zoom. Okay, but getting them to figure out how texting works, no, that's not really them. I think, first of all, you have to remember that it's very difficult to sort of group people and say because they're older, they're not tech savvy, or because they're in this category, they can't do this or they can do that. I think it's more helpful to think about that you need to have, for the key processes, you've got to have touch points that matter and that are effective for the different personas. So for example, if there's somebody, if the only way to renew their membership is through a very complicated web-based form, it's very likely that somebody who is not happy with technology is not going to be very good at renewing. And it's going to cause a lot of pain and suffering for them and possibly also for the organization. And so if you said, well, if that's the problem, why don't we provide a way to have people pay for their membership on their credit card every month, and it just auto renews. They'd probably be just as happy with that. Is that using technology? Yeah, at your end, but from their perspective, a major stress is now no longer part of it, right? I think the other thing is to recognize that there's programmatic things you're able to do, like mentorships, okay, where you've got the younger mentee helping an older person figure out some of this technology stuff in the context of say, professional development or whatever it happens to be. But the older person knows more, they're a veteran, they know more about the industry that can help the younger person. So the question is not really, in my view, how do you teach people technology, but how do you wire the association membership together in a way where people see value, direct value from the connection to these people. That younger person might not have been able to access that older person's network and knowledge and everything. That older person might not have had a safe place to learn how to do some of these newfangled things that somebody else would have, been a lot easier to do. So that's how I would answer that question. Thank you, by the way, for asking it.
So the next question is from Alston Clare, and Alston was asking, we offer memberships to both organizations and to individuals, and they're facing some challenges right now with some renewals with large organizations. But if they don't renew those large organizations to actually make up for the gap in revenues, they have to get many individual members, which they're maybe not ready for. So are organizational members still relevant?
Oh man, of course they are. Okay, of course they are. But and I think you know that. Right? But I think there's a question about what the heck does organizational member actually mean? Because with some associations, it's, well, gee, if you have more than 4 people who are members, we'll give you an organizational price and you just pay that, and all these extra people, they get cheaper membership, right? On the other hand, other associations, an organizational membership is because the things that the association does makes a difference to the actual member, the organizational member. For example, advocacy is often very important at the organizational level, not just the individual level. So the answer, the key to this question, understanding this question, the answer to this question, in my view, is to realize that the needs of the organization are different than the needs of the individual. So we talked about it earlier. If it's a question of saying, hey, organization, here's why you need to belong, it's because we do these and you're able to tie them to the individual goals of that organization, they'll see the value. And by the way, the more of their people are in there, the better it becomes. For individuals who make the decision to join or not join, oftentimes it's more about, how do I do better in my career? How do I personally get that certification? How do I find about new jobs, right? An organization does not want their people to leave, certainly not now, right? So if you're focusing the benefits to all the individual things, but you're selling to an organization who does not want people to leave and is really more concerned about completely other things, there's no surprise there's a little bit of a ruckus there. So I think that it's actually a simple question, but the answer is actually is complex because it speaks to what programs do you have to demonstrate value to the association, and that often is something that associations haven't really looked at because they've always served the individual, many of them anyway.
Right.
Next question.
I'll go to the next question. Yes, for sure. So the next question is from Eric Connor, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. So Eric is asking, the evolving role of learning as it relates to member value and brand of the association. Is learning still relevant, and what type of learning?
Oh man, learning is so relevant. Thank you. Thank you for that question. The only problem is they can get that learning in a whole bunch of other places, not just at the association. So, the question of, how do you make sure that the learning you provide is relevant, is up to date, has got the most forward thinkers that they can only get, as in the context of that association. So this is something that sometimes is very difficult because there's some associations that say, well, we're going to get a speaker, but we're not going to pay them. Or we're going to pay them like $200. Okay, and the speaker thinks, wow, look at that. I could go on a webinar and I could spend the entire time selling to these people who are on the webinar, right? And so the association might think, oh, we're providing webinar professional development. Okay, but the speaker is not really a speaker, they're a salesperson. So it's a bit of a funny thing, because the expert goes ahead and does their own webinar. And what a surprise. Okay. They'll charge whatever they charge, and so the members have choice. It wasn't this way, eons ago. Even before COVID, when everyone went to the annual convention, for example, or this one-day conference, nowadays the bets are off even more. So learning is critically important. The best, to tell you the truth, is a particular type of hybrid learning, where instead of thinking about it as a single point, gee, you're going to come to this day, we're going to fill you up, and the problems will be solved, and you'll be the expert. No, the best learning is one where there's some stuff before the event, there's the event, and there's some stuff after the event. And by the way, throughout that, community forms. And that community, for example, is a great place for an association can market the next event, which there's some stuff beforehand, there's some stuff there. Now, that stuff that's there, that might be live. Hopefully we'll be able to do more of that live. The stuff beforehand and after, that might be virtual. Some of it might be white paper, some of it might be discussion groups, some of it might be a webinar, it might be a bunch of other things. But it's the only reason why they're going to attend that learning is not so that they can go, tick, I've done learning, but because they have a problem that they need solved. And only by doing this kind of hybrid, if you will, type of learning, do I feel that they'll actually be able to solve that problem. Yep, it's real important. But listen, it's a marketplace of ideas right now, and getting the best educators doing the best things is sometimes very difficult for associations when they can't afford the best educators. Okay, so there's my answer, Farhad. I hope that helped you, by the way.
For sure. And next question, Randall, is from E. Capes. I don't know how to pronounce your name correctly again. So E. Capes and also Laura Yanidi. You both had the same question. Do you really need a social media presence? And if so, how to keep members engaged?
Okay, so also very important questions. Thank you. Thank you for asking it. It really depends on why you need one in the first place and who the target is. So, for example, if you're using it to recruit new members and to market the association and for advocacy, for example, and outreach to people, there may be a reason for that. And by the way, it's not this generic social media, because every platform has got its own strategy, if you will, and specific things. I sort of joked about, do you want to be a tenant in the Facebook building or the LinkedIn building, or do you want to be a landlord and have your own? Well, you know what? That's also part of the mix. How do you keep members more engaged? I think that's a tougher one. And the reason why is very often the social media that I've seen, and by the way, I've seen some excellent social media that's been amazing. Okay, obviously some great social media managers. But what I've also seen is I've seen social media which is fluff at best. Why would you want to look at something? You're a busy person. Why would you want to check there and all you see is fluff that is of no value to you? Okay, and so you don't keep people engaged with fluff. You need to decide what's the purpose of the social media and deliver that. And that purpose has got to synchronize very strongly with the value that you need, or the value rather that the members or prospective members or whoever the target is will see. And cut down the fluff. So part of it is to do market research, focus groups, surveys, etc. But surveys sometimes only reach to the people that you already have in your list, right? There's other people as well. My challenge would be this. And listen, I've written books on social media, so don't get me wrong, I love it. But my challenge would be this. Answer the question, what would happen if we cut our social media investment in half? Or what would happen if we doubled it? Would the needle change in either case? And I suspect sometimes the needle would change very much, sometimes not in the right direction. But in other cases, the needle might not change so much. And when that's the case, you know your answer. Gee, maybe take that budget or the time that that staff person is spending on that. Maybe it can be repurposed some other way. So yeah, social media is very, very important, but it's got to fit into a need. Internal efficiency on one hand, recruiting, marketing, advocacy, member or prospective member service, right? But if there's fluff, that's what they're going to think you're all about, which is probably not what you want.
Right. So Randall will take the last question
Sure.
from the audience submissions. So this is from Laura Nelson, and Laura is asking, are associations using a mix of marketing tactics that are more successful than others? What are some inexpensive but effective tactics that you have encountered?
Oh man, it's kind of there's an old joke. If you ask 10 economists, you'll get 11 opinions, right? And so if there's 500 associations, you're going to get 501 amazingly awesome ideas. And so I don't want to say that this would work with everybody, but yeah, sure, I'll give you some ideas. One of the questions is a veterans program, something specifically designed to help veterans and alumni sort of help transmit and bring up the next. Another is a young professionals program, which takes a look at that cohort and gives them a project to work on throughout the year, which maybe gets presented at the end of the year. So that connects people in ways, and there can be some mentors that help, etc., external people. Another is a bring a friend initiative. This is the idea that, listen, how many people are working at the association's, at the association management company or in the association's home office? A couple, okay? Plus there's a bunch of, even a large one, there's still just a couple in that particular, function. Then there's a whole bunch of volunteers. But if you take a look at everyone in the membership and said, listen, what are the things that we can do programmatically to incentivize each person to bring somebody else? Okay, of course, it's an instant, yes, we could double our size. But on the other hand, you've got to make sure you deliver, right? You've got to make sure there's processes to follow up. So it's more than just bring a friend and all will be good, but there's a whole program that needs to be behind it. I think there needs to be special content, right? Stuff that makes a real difference, okay, as opposed to the run-of-the-mill. Things that are special, right? And I think that it's harder to do that when you think. I'll give one other idea. This is the idea of having communities of interest. Many national associations are broken up into chapters or provincial institutes or networks, etc. But there's probably another way to slice it. Instead of vertically like this, maybe horizontally. So maybe there's everybody in an association that is dealing with a particular issue. How to onboard a board of directors, okay? How to, I don't know what it is, recruit the best people. How to, reduce costs in the annual conference. How to do the best virtual conference, how to attract sponsors, how to whatever. But if you take 5 or 6 of these special groups, you can create communities that go across the regions or across the areas and say, okay, these separate networks can put together a whole bunch of information. It's the mastermind concept in the sense that, each one of us might be very smart, but we're a lot smarter all together if we've got all these ideas together and sharing them in a forum focused on a particular topic. So, the communities kind of concept that go across. There's a million different ways that you can actually answer this question. I hope these ones helped.
For sure. So Randall, what would be your key takeaway for our audience today?
Oh man, there's a huge opportunity in this space. It's filled with super smart people who care deeply. It's everybody's in the same industry. It's just a huge opportunity. We just need to take it. And taking the opportunity doesn't mean being satisfied with the status quo. It means pushing the envelope a little bit, thinking a little bit differently, and saying, how might we actually start that conversation?
And I guess like that conversation and that transformation will not be easy. It will be uncomfortable. And I love this saying. I don't know who said it, but life begins at the end of your comfort zone. So it will be challenging, but it is worth it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And just to summarize, honestly, Farhad, it doesn't have to be as painful as you think. If somebody said, "How do I drive from here to there?" Terrible directions, but if I had a GPS, I could just follow it. The problem's been solved before.
There you go. There you go. All right. So Randall, for our audience, can you share a personal habit that has contributed the most to your success?
Oh my God. I don't know. This is embarrassing. I wrote a bunch of notes, but they make no sense. I think the personal habit that I'm most proud of is that I'm not just one-dimensional. I ingest a huge amount of content from all kinds of different sources in different industries, personally, professionally, history, physics, politics, you name it, all the different things that I can, because oftentimes solutions and ideas in one context, in one paradigm, can spark some amazing ideas in another. And that's one thing that I really enjoy doing is learning and then organizing some of that chaos into order for my clients and for my friends and family. So that's my answer to your question.
So Randall, how can people reach out to you if they have more questions?
Sure, I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody. Go to www.randallcraig.com and my contact information is there. Or you could book a meeting with me at randallcraig.net/30, and I'd be happy to have a conversation. And once again, I love learning about what other organizations, other associations are doing, and it gives me a chance to do that. So go to randallcraig.com or randallcraig.net/30 for my calendar.
And we will put a link to that, like to your website, on our show notes as well. Randall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Farhad. And thank everybody for joining us today, too.
All right. That was the episode with Randall Craig. Randall gave us a lot of ideas to think about. And as I always say, don't get overwhelmed. From all the ideas that you got today, find at least one item that you can take action on. We always go to a lot of like webinars and podcasts and whatnot, but unless we take action, nothing happens. So I invite you all to find one key idea that you can take action on today. And once again, if you are exploring how to build a membership website, or if you want to learn how a membership website can grow your association membership more, please join one of our learning events on our website. They're free learning events and you can find them at grype.ca/events. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you all the best with your membership journey. Bye for now.